Hello, and welcome to the Data Engineering Podcast, the show about modern data management. Data teams everywhere face the same problem. They're forcing ML models, streaming data, and real-time processing through orchestration tools built for simple ETL. The result? Inflexible infrastructure that can't adapt to different workloads. That's why Cash App and Cisco rely on Prefect. Cash App's fraud detection team got what they needed: flexible compute options, isolated environments for custom packages, and seamless data exchange between workflows. Each model runs on the right infrastructure, whether that's high-memory machines or distributed compute. Orchestration is the foundation that determines whether your data team ships or struggles. ETL, ML model training, AI engineering, streaming, Prefect runs it all from ingestion to activation in one platform. Whoop and 1Password also trust Prefect for their data operations. If these industry leaders use Prefect for critical workloads, see what it can do for you at dataengineeringpodcast.com/prefect. Are you tired of data migrations that drag on for months or even years? What if I told you there's a way to cut that timeline by up to a factor of 6 while guaranteeing accuracy? Datafold's Migration Agent is the only AI-powered solution that doesn't just translate your code. It validates every single data point to ensure perfect parity between your old and new systems. Whether you're moving from Oracle to Snowflake, migrating stored procedures to dbt, or handling complex multi-system migrations, they deliver production-ready code with a guaranteed timeline and fixed price. Stop burning budget on endless consulting hours. Visit dataengineeringpodcast.com/datafold to book a demo and see how they turn months-long migration nightmares into week-long success stories. Your host is Tobias Macy, and today I'm interviewing Kate Shaw about the true costs of maintaining legacy systems. So, Kate, can you start by introducing yourself?
Hi, Tobias. My name is Kate Shaw. I'm the Senior Product Manager for Data and SLIM, which stands for SnapLogic Intelligent Modernizer here at SnapLogic. I lead strategy and delivery for our modernization initiatives. We help enterprises move from legacy integration platforms to our AI cloud native iPaaS. And we focus on moving customers and organizations move from legacy integration systems into modern AI-powered and cloud-native environments so they can unlock the value that's been buried in their decades of data and integration complexity. And so our goal is to really make that transition simpler and smarter and turn technical debt and locked down data into opportunity and potential for revenue generation.
And do you remember how you first got started working in data?
Oh, yes. I'm going to go back into the mists of time now. I actually studied how data flows around organizations and how it was managed at university, believe it or not, several decades ago. I hasten to add, so I'm really dating myself. Yeah, I did a degree in information systems, and artificial intelligence was my minor specialism back in the day. So nothing like how artificial intelligence looks today, but yeah, we did some work on computational linguistics, artificial neural networks, but it was really all about how did data flow? Where was it stored? How did it get consumed? How did you break it down for optimal storage or optimize access? So I've always really been in this space in one shape or another. And from there, I moved into enterprise content management, which was managing structured and unstructured content around governance and compliance aspects there before cloud technologies came in, and I worked for a large industrial Internet of Things platform provider, managing all their data services. And one of the biggest challenges we always had was, well, how does the data get here? How do we get it from where it lives today? How do we break down those silos and get it to where it needs to be? So a few years ago, I heard about SnapLogic, and I decided this is the place that I needed to be to start answering those types of questions.
And so digging now into this question of legacy systems, migration, maintenance, etc. Obviously, the term legacy has the idea that whatever the system is something that is no longer actively used or is not something that people want to use. And before we dig too much into the meat of the conversation, I'm interested in what you view as the criteria for when a given system transitions into that state of being legacy.
Yeah, it's a tricky conversation or a tricky concept because some people may say, oh, well, it's when the innovation stops. But that may actually just be a sign that the system that you're talking about has reached a certain level of maturity. And so you don't need to change very much of it anymore. So innovation naturally slows down. I tend to see legacy, though, as when a system stops being of value, when it stops being of value and it becomes more of a risk. So when it starts blocking or preventing new IT innovation, or your IT team spends more time patching and fixing it, and they metaphorically put up barbed wire around that system, and it's like, oh, don't touch this, don't even consider making any modifications or changes to it. So I see it more as when the system becomes a risk, it's no longer materially contributing advantage for the organization, and it's adding to the workload without adding to the return on investment.
And one of the interesting aspects of that transition from a system that is providing value to one where it becomes more of a burden is generally not even specific to the technology. It's more around the context in which it is operating, where sometimes that's because the team hasn't put in the necessary effort to upgrade and update that system in order for it to continue providing value. Sometimes it's because the operating context in which it is deployed has changed, and so it is more difficult to operate that system, whether that is in terms of the data center, networking, credential management, security controls, etc. And sometimes it is because maybe the vendor that created that system is no longer around. And I'm just wondering what you see as some of the common factors that tip a system into that state of being a burden rather than a boon.
Yeah. So when we talk about system implementation, and when any sort of IT project occurs, people tend to think about, okay, what is the cost to get this deployed? What is the cost to train all my personnel? What is the change management cost? What is not just the license fee or the subscription fee? What's my operating cost? You think about those costs. What many organizations or what many projects maybe don't consider is the technical debt that they are incurring. And what is the associated cost with addressing that, with fixing that, with performing the patches? What is the potential impact of if I don't apply this patch, or if I skip a month? What's the worst that could happen? And so, it's when technology actually starts consuming IT's time. I think there was a study that said a ballpark between 20 and 40% of an IT budget can be spent by the average company on technical debt on a regular basis. And tech debt is something that it can be easy to cast aside, sweep under the rug, just not address. Like, take your eye off the ball of it, and pretty soon you've got a mountain of tech debt there. But the minute a system goes live, everybody is incurring tech debt. And that sounds really sort of negative, but it speaks to the pace of innovation. When IT projects or IT systems start blocking innovation, start blocking revenue generation, when they become so sensitive, maybe there aren't even security patches anymore. Maybe there are no migration tools available, because we all like as software vendors, we like technology to be sticky. We like to, in some ways, have our customers come to us and stay with us and not move off of our products. So in some cases, it gets really hard for customers. Once they go to a vendor, they get locked in. And depending if that vendor has multiple different offerings, that cover a range of different processes or functions, you can get vendor locking quite easily, quite quickly. And so when one of those tools maybe starts getting into that sort of legacy arena, or getting into that legacy status, it can be very hard to think about, how do I swap that one thing out for something else that will still work with the rest of my portfolio that I've got deployed? The other factors that come in here is, so not just IT cost, it's lost opportunity cost as well. So for example, if I have a new IT project that I want to implement, but it's reliant on connecting to a legacy system, maybe there's no API, or maybe there's an API, but it's using sort of old protocols, old mechanisms, or insecure connection types. In some ways, looking for new IT projects, that's the biggest lens, or the easiest way of seeing what your legacy systems are, is that how complex is it to tie this system into something new? And if you can't, there are whole case studies and published accounts of how organizations have sometimes had to scrap IT, innovative IT projects that would give them massive competitive advantage, give them huge return on investment, because there is no way to modernize one key component of their system. And so it's not just really about the maintainability of what's there, it's about the impedance that it adds to revenue generating, it's the impedance that it adds to cost saving. Sometimes it's scalability. Maybe you've implemented, or maybe there's a system that's been implemented that worked okay at a certain scale, but you sort of break that barrier and now everything slows to a crawl, or the users can't guarantee that the data is accessible in a given time frame. It can slow down the pace of not just your sales, but your operations and execution. So those are some of the other challenges that legacy systems pose, besides all of the standard security challenges, patching challenges, technology challenges. There's actually an operational cost when you have some of these legacy systems hanging around.
Another interesting factor that plays into that accrual of tech debt and sometimes the delay of actually putting in the investment to pay it down, particularly in the case of retiring a functioning system, is the sunk cost fallacy of, well, I've already put in the capital investment to obtain this software license or this hardware appliance, or I've already put in the time and effort of my engineering resources to build and integrate this system. I don't want to throw that all away, even though it is contributing to an ongoing cost and maintenance burden of additional engineering resources or additional monetary investment. And I'm wondering how organizations should be thinking about that question of how much is too much investment to put into a system, and what are the points where you're actually going to start getting diminishing returns for continuing to feed into that existing technology platform, and ways that that can have a compounding effect in terms of accrual of technical debt because you're not investing in forward-looking technologies or forward-looking capabilities.
Yeah, we tend to get used to the status quo in some ways, and it's when you've rolled out this, and again, this may not happen quite so much anymore with the mobility of people changing roles on a fairly frequent basis in, many technology companies or technology roles. Typically, people do not necessarily stay for 10, 20 years with the same organization any longer. That's a cultural shift. But when you have invested time, sweat, blood and tears, I guess, as well, sometimes in getting a system live, you do invest part of yourself in that. And so you are justifiably proud to get that system up and running. And that once everybody is trained, and you remember the good old days of when that system first came online and how it revolutionized the way you work, you do continue to pay into, and happily on some level, you do continue to pay into, and think it's fine to pay into that system. And as you say, you've got the sunk cost, you've already spent the bulk of the money, but that's typically because you're not necessarily affixing a cost to the tech debt, that you've accrued, or that you continue to accrue. It's very hard to take the old adage, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, it's working. And it just the idea, the risk associated with removing that system and pulling it out of our infrastructure, that can be a scary thought. Because when a system's working fine, in an ideal world, very few people actually notice it. It just becomes part of the day-to-day. When a system starts failing, starts slowing down, or even starts breaking, or when it starts impacting the user experience negatively, that's when people start noticing that something isn't quite right. So if it's just ticking along, and you're quite happy paying your subscription fee or your support fees, and okay, periodically, maybe once a couple of months or once a quarter, maybe the system has to go down for a day, it's you get used to that, and it becomes just the cost of doing business or the cost of running that system. I think we should always be looking for, is there a better way of doing this? We get so stuck into, oh, well, that's just the way it is. We sometimes forget to look beyond and see that there is a potential for a better experience out there. And when to make that call really is, you have to be very honest with yourself or with the teams about what is the impact that's having on every different type of stakeholder. And is there an additional benefit if we were to swap this out? Is there something else that we could do? So, for example, is this taking a lot of my IT team's time? Is this impeding the productivity of my knowledge workers in my business or my stakeholders who use this on a daily or a fairly regular basis? Is there a different way of doing things that mean we could repurpose or reuse the data or the information in that system to be an additional revenue stream for the organization? Is there a way of managing or examining the information that system holds or the process that it executes or supports? Is there a different way of approaching it that could be either cutting our costs or generating more revenue? And that's sort of the evaluation of, is this system still of value? Or does the risk associated with what happens if it goes wrong? What happens if it fails? How creaky is it? How much more can it scale? Those questions have to be sort of really looked at in a stark light. And obviously, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, but don't go throwing good money after bad. The sunk cost, yes, there is pressure associated with that, but at what point is too much? And if you're already sort of asking your questions like that now, it would sort of be a good point to start thinking about, well, what else is out there? Is there a different way of actually approaching this problem or supporting this process with an alternative or an add-on? So if those questions are sort of, well, is this system okay? I think you're already at the point where you may want to consider what else is available.
There are a couple of interesting points in what you were just discussing that I want to dig into. One of them being the idea of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And in particular, in the context of data systems, brokenness is often not a binary, and the system itself may be executing and it's not throwing any active errors, but the information it's generating is not actually correct, but nobody has done the due diligence to understand in what ways it might be correct. And the common reference for this is the idea of calculating some sort of derived metric where the calculation or the business logic that is assumed in that calculation does not actually mirror the realities of the business. And so the numbers that you're getting are not accurate in the context of the information that it's trying to convey. And so there is some level of brokenness in that regard. And if you don't have the quality checks, the data monitoring, then you may not know that it's not broken just because it's not actively spewing errors into your logs. And the other aspect that you mentioned there of the employee turnover and the fact that people often don't stay in one role for years, if not decades anymore. And so there's a lot of lost context in that regard, because somebody who implements a system may not be around by the time that system is due for retirement. And so there are a lot of unknowns about early assumptions that were made and ways that that system is actually being used that are, unless you document them or unless you have a means of fully enumerating everything that's happening in that system, it's difficult to gain the confidence that whatever you're replacing it with is doing all the things it needs to do. And I'm speaking from experience of early in my career where I had a server that just sat and ran a job every day and nobody really knew exactly what the job was, just that it was really critical. And I wrote some scripts that I was pretty sure did everything it was supposed to do to replace it, but I wasn't quite sure, and I never actually got that server out before I went to my next job. So it's just a perfect example of both of those points.
Yeah, it's sometimes when we run metrics, talking to the first point about data accuracy, when we get used to metrics running and they look sort of right, maybe sometimes that's as much validation as those metrics get. Maybe they're not telling you the right things, or maybe the data coming into that equation, that algorithm changes, or no system really is standalone anymore. They're a mesh of different interconnected systems. And so when one system further upstream changes, maybe the data being fed into that metric is no longer accurate, but it still looks sort of right. So we always have to be, I think, questioning about, where is my data coming from? Has anything changed in that entire flow to get the data to this point? And is that data telling me what I think it should be? If we put it in a common context that I come across from time to time, one of the great ways of using data in a retail system, for example, is like online ordering. If you go online, go to any website, go to a a shopping cart, buy something. Everybody has felt that frustration of the supermarket coming back and saying, hey, we don't have this anymore. Would you like to substitute it with something else? Or, I'm sorry, we don't have any of those. We've cancelled your order, or there's been a delay in your order. We know that that's frustrating. Now, as an individual, it's frustrating. If you scaled it up to the retail business, that could be a significant loss of business, especially if you put that in a business to business sort of perspective. So getting accurate live data is always a challenge. And if you've got like a legacy technology feeding in like periodically, pulling that data in from time to time or on a regular basis, but it isn't actually live, you see that more often than not. But because data is flowing, you don't necessarily question the accuracy of it down to like the minute, the 5 minute, the hour-long interval. And in some industries, some verticals, that is more challenging. For example, in the financial space, the stock markets, interest rates, any transaction that crosses country or currency borders, having split-second accuracy in your data is absolutely vital. So yeah, it's always a challenge of how new is this data, how good is it, and that's a sliding scale. It's very rarely it's 100% accurate or it's 0% accurate. You've got to think about your confidence level and how accurate do you need that to be, because you can totally over engineer a system. You can say, okay, I want data the minute changes over there, split second it's updated somewhere else, and you can design and build systems that way. But at what cost? How much do you over engineer it? So yes, data accuracy, always important. And as we start thinking about integrated and interconnected systems and infrastructures, we have to be constantly aware that changing one component in that puzzle or in that picture could impact any number of things. And like you were talking about, that job that ran and nobody knew why, nobody knew what it exactly did, but it was mission critical. Oh, if I had a penny for every time I had a story like that. Back in the day, when I was a consultant, I would go to customer sites and I would talk to them about their content silos and content management and where their data lived and why it lived there and how it moved through their systems. You would often find this. You will find that there are people who work with a system who know exactly what it can do. But the second you bring somebody else into that team or you start scaling the team out, some of that fidelity is lost. Some of that tribal knowledge is diluted. And people end up making, with the best will in the world and with the best of intentions, they end up making decisions or choices that potentially that system wasn't originally designed to support or originally implemented for. And in some cases, systems can be implemented successfully, but then their usage gets a bit twisted or a bit modified. It evolves slightly, and all of a sudden, a system that was implemented for one purpose or to solve one problem is now, oh, well, we'll throw another problem at it and we don't need to change it, we don't need to reassess. And that can lead to challenges. I'm just going to put it that way. But yes, even talking to customers now, when I go in and I'm talking to customers about what their modernization problems are, what challenges they're facing, why do they think they need to modernize? It's not an uncommon refrain that we have these things and we're not entirely sure what they do. When you're implementing a system, things like change management training, documentation, on day one, those could be spot on, they could be perfect. As systems evolve over time, as new behaviors get added in, as old behaviors are deprecated, as new defects or patches are found, or as the business decides they want to change how they work with that system, things change and sometimes documentation doesn't catch up. So it's not unusual for organizations to all of a sudden have this system that is, yes, super useful and is still providing value and still mostly does what they think they need it to, what an organization thinks they need it to, but maybe nobody in the entire business fully understands how all of the nuances work. So some of the challenges we see here, especially around like that tribal knowledge and people moving around and even just being promoted within teams or being their workload added to, maybe they can't keep up with the changes into one of those systems, but maybe some of these routines run periodically. They don't necessarily run every day. If you think about month end, quarter end, year end, tax season, Black Friday. Some of these events in the annual calendar that we all get used to, they mean very specific things depending on what type of data system that you're talking about. So it could be that you don't need this job to run every day, as long as it runs within a certain period of maybe quarter end or year end. And maybe you do need it to run every day, but the outcome of that process isn't used immediately. It's stored and used down the road. And so there used to be, I'm not saying this is right, there used to be an approach of, well, we're not quite sure who the owner of this thing is. So if we stop it, we'll see who screams, and then we can go and turn it back on or re-enable it for them, because we're not quite sure what it does or who uses it or where the data goes. We'll just switch it off and see what happens. I do not recommend this approach. I'm just going to put that out there right now. This is not a SnapLogic endorsed approach to technology and working out which systems are important and which are not. But you don't always get an immediate feedback loop on that one, is all I'm going to say, because it could be that something that was ticking over quite nicely, you switch it off, and for days, weeks, months, it can be fine. But come year end, everything blows up. Or, come Black Friday, all of a sudden you can't scale. You need to because of you're in the retail industry, for example. Yes. So totally agree. I've seen this a number of times in any number of industries, and there has not been a great solution to that problem. But it does bring us into like the realm of governance. And this is one of the areas that I think many industries, not just many organizations, but many industries have challenges. That technology is running so fast, it's hard to try and keep up with those changes. Sometimes when they're black box changes, sometimes, those changes happen over a long arc, and it's small incremental changes that over time amount to a massively different change. But then where does that get documented, communicated, tracked? Who owns that? All of that is super challenging, but it speaks to the need for good observability tools, good governance tools, and knowing where you stand with the data that you're collecting. Because obviously, when we're talking in recent years, again, the focus has been on personally identifiable information. You look at the California Privacy Act, you look at GDPR and others. Organizations or industries in the last, I would say, 10 to 15 years have had some serious pressure from regulatory bodies, from governments, international bodies, to get their houses in order with regards to how they manage data that can identify individuals. And there may or may not be avenues for managing that data in some of these legacy systems. So we can't know what's coming down the road from a regulation, from a statutory perspective. We build products, we build solutions and systems to meet today's problems that hopefully can extend and scale. But then you can't build for the future without being sort of risking that you're not going to hit it directly, or you're not going to necessarily meet that target or hit that goal. You don't know what is coming, so you code for what you know, or you build for what you know, with a view to making something extensible. But yeah, being able to have the observability, the lineage tracking, the governance mechanisms, and the supporting processes and plans, that's always going to be a challenge, because everything technology is constantly changing. People are constantly innovating and always using technology in some ways that it wasn't necessarily built for, so that you can't necessarily take that into account as you build out a new technology system. Sorry, I sort of went off on a tangent for user bias.
That's absolutely a useful direction as well, because I was going to start asking about ways that we can, as we're implementing new systems, or even as we're maintaining existing systems, build them or evolve them in such a way that they don't necessarily have to be in that binary state of active or legacy, where you can build using principles of evolutionary architecture and design the overall data stack in a way that it is composable, and that even if one piece of technology maybe ceases to be maintained, it is something that can be replaced without having to rebuild your entire data stack every time, which is where a lot of the ideas of the whole modern data stack came forward, where people had been dealing with these monolithic systems that was all or nothing, and we've moved more towards these component-oriented systems, which have their own growing pains and associated costs. But I'm just wondering how you're seeing teams address that challenge of, I don't want want to have to deal with legacy system retirement every year, 5 years, 10 years, whatever it might be. I want to build this system in a way that I can constantly evolve it and maybe replace little pieces of it, but not have to do a big bang migration every time something starts to fall out of favor or starts to fall out of maintainability.
There's a phrase that you may hear more frequently of late, and it's called, or it's the composable enterprise. So where organizations, they don't have, as you say, monolithic systems, it's very difficult to maintain those. If you touch one thing, you're impacting everything, and it's very, those tend to be quite difficult because if one piece goes wrong, then it could bring down the entire system, or the entire system needs to be replaced. Whereas if you look to a composable sort of architecture where you can swap out components, exactly as you said, being able to disconnect one component and replace it with something else, that is a trend that we are seeing more and more across multiple different industries. It's super helpful because in a lot of ways, it allows you to make economies. You don't necessarily get a specific vendor lock-in if you have a composable architecture. You can usually get something that, owing to open standards, can plug in, can work, can coexist and integrate, can communicate with other pieces of your infrastructure or stack or your architecture. It doesn't have to be necessarily from the same vendor, though. And this is particularly key as we start thinking about AI and AI tooling and all the different vendors that are out there that are providing different large language models, LLMs, or other AI technologies. Being able to swap out different models in technology that supports business process. If there's an LLM under the cover, if I can take that out and swap it out for a different model that maybe handles different types of tasks more effectively, that is all part of this vision of a composable enterprise. So yeah, absolutely, we are seeing trends here. Again, it's putting the emphasis on having robust APIs, API management systems, so you can track actually what's being used, that you can govern access to different components of your technology stack for different roles or departments within your organization. But yeah, it is something that is becoming more common. And it's a good thing because it's a challenge to orchestrate it all. And obviously interoperability, and as you introduce and swap out different components of that, you have to make sure that you understand the impact of everything else that particular component can touch. So it does add complexity because you are dealing usually with a multi-vendor system, or in some cases a multi-technology stack system with all these different pieces plugging into each other. But it does give you opportunity to go for the best deal, to make an economy in your cost to serve or your total cost of ownership. But it also means that you do have the luxury of being able to take one piece out and swap it for something else if that will give you a better advantage. And that could be a cost advantage, it could be a data and processing advantage, or a data consolidation advantage, or it could be a revenue generating opportunity that you now get because you've swapped out one component for another, and it does things slightly differently. But again, you then have to think about, how does that play back into my transparency, my lineage, my provenance of the data, where it's coming from, how it's being transformed, how it's now being interpreted by downstream processes and systems. So it's not a freebie, it's a strategy, and there are things that need to be managed around it. But yeah, it's moving from a monolithic system. It tends to give a lot more flexibility, and obviously adds a little more complexity too. But the advantages that we see there, that our customers tell us about, seem so far to outweigh any potential cost or challenge from going from a single vendor lock-in system to a multi-vendor composable architecture.
The other aspect of legacy systems is that even in the process of migrating, or once the migration is complete, you still have to plan for its retirement and doing some final validation. And that is something that also requires time and effort. And I'm wondering, as people are building and implementing new technologies, and as they do move to these more evolutionary design principles and these composable systems, how should teams be thinking about the overall investment of adopting a technology in light of the fact that eventually it will need to be shut down? And how should they be thinking about planning for that eventual state early in the process to prevent it from becoming long and drawn out and having that loss of context as people retire, get promoted, leave the company, to make sure that those decisions and the integrations are documented, and in particular that documentation is maintained, hopefully in some sort of automated fashion, so it's not somebody's job to remember to go do that every however often.
Most of the time, documentation, if anything falls by the wayside, it's going to be that. And it's a huge problem. With regards to planning for end of life, it's almost that as organizations start looking for, okay, this system, we think that we want to replace it, or there's something else that we could bring in to replace this, you need an exit strategy. It's very simple. You need to understand what all needs to be done. And so when you think about putting a new system and going live with a new system, that's really quite nerve-wracking. It's really exciting because, hey, look, we've got this new system in. But then the question always becomes, well, how long do we keep the old one around for? They're usually a strategy of running two systems in parallel for a period of time, so that if the worst case happens with the new system that we're bringing online, we can always just switch that off and divert everybody back to the old system, because we know it's still running and we know it's okay. It's still going to be operational. And worst case scenario, we'll just go back to all the inefficiencies of the old system. We can live with it for a while until we bring the new system back online again. The question is, at what point do you get a comfort level that the old system can be retired, can be switched off? And then, that's a big day as well. That's a huge day. That's a huge event. And that is sometimes worth celebrating as well, because that is when you start actually saving on your operation costs and the cost of execution. But switching off a system is not the end. There is data. There are HADR strategies and processes that need to be rewritten and sometimes modified to extract that legacy system from those processes. You've got the old data hanging around wherever it's stored, whether that's on-prem in a cloud somewhere, that's consuming space and that needs maintenance. If you have personally identifiable information or sensitive information in those systems that you have to stay on top of with regards to data management protocols, so maybe somebody comes back to your PII admin or whoever in your organization and says, okay, I want you to purge all records related to me from the system or from all of your systems. You have to have policies and processes around, well, how do I pull that out of my backup data? And how do I segregate my backup data for this one particular system from all of my other backed up data wherever it lives? So just turning a system off is not the end of the process. You need an exit strategy. You need to know where all that data lives, what all threads connect to that system, because it could be the day you turn that off, somebody in a far-flung team starts screaming because there is a connection that you didn't actually identify when you were building the replacement. So yes, exit strategy, thinking about all of the different stakeholders, thinking about all of the different protocols and policies that revolve around the data that you're managing or that system is touching or influencing in some way. And then, as I said earlier, you hit different points in the year, whether that's the fiscal year or the calendar year, that happen once in a blue moon, or that happen every quarter, every end of year, when you're closing the books, every busy season, whether that's tax season or the holiday season for retail, you may see some challenges there. So you have to think holistically, not just about today and tomorrow, but over the course of a period of time, over the course of a period of a year or more. And especially if you're in a merger and acquisition type of circumstance, if your organization does a lot of mergers, does a lot of acquisitions, or if your organization is acquired and then sort of passed, shall we say, how is that data also going to be managed? How is the legacy of that system, even though the system is off? How does that get divided up? Who gets the responsibility and ownership of that? So yeah, exit strategy is 2 words, but it incorporates a whole lot of different areas and different activities that need to happen, or elements that need to be considered.
And early in your description of the work that you're doing at SnapLogic and with Slim, you brought up the terminology of cloud native, which has gained a lot of popularity as a term that encompasses a large number of technologies and ideals. And obviously, the other major trend in play right now is the adoption of AI with the advent of generative AI and large language models and the broad capabilities that they bring to the picture. And I'm wondering what you see as some of the opportunity cost involved in maintaining legacy systems with the presumption that they are not engineered to interoperate with either or both of those concepts.
Yeah, quite honestly, that's one of the challenges that we're seeing. A lot of our customers and prospects who come to us with challenges, one of the biggest ones they have is, I have these legacy systems, I have all of this data, but I have absolutely no way of getting it to where it needs to be for me to take advantage of it using these new technologies. And it's at this point that we start looking at what is the value of a system versus the risk or associated cost of a system. Because if that system you have, it may have worked well for years, even decades, it may be serving your needs, but if it actively blocks innovation or the opportunity to look at new revenue streams that new technology and innovation can provide, now it's becoming a liability. And so when you have data silos, and data silos are not a new thing. As long as we've had technology, we've had challenges with data that lives in one place and it needs to be somewhere else, or it could add value in other areas. If I have a throwback back to my enterprise content management days, several decades ago, it was a challenge back then with, I've got all this data, it lives all over the place, I don't know what I have, but I think that it could give me competitive advantage within my industry. We see that still now. It's just the technology that could give you or could yield that competitive advantage is now, it tends to be AI oriented. Being able to break down the walls of those silos, it has been a challenge for me for the last 20 something years, and it continues to be a challenge for me on a daily basis, because data is absolutely vital in the AI space. If you're trying to run an AI project, you need to feed it data. And this is why you can see reports of between 70 and 80% of AI initiatives failing, because they'll get to a POC, and the POC, the proof of concept of that AI system, will be fantastic because you've given it, or maybe it's had a subset or a testing set of data provided, and it's been trained on that, and and it's hitting 10 for 10 every time you ask it. Every time you run through the processes, it's responding perfectly. Now, how do you scale that out and connect that to your production systems? And this is where most AI initiatives fail, in that the data does not flow freely or does not flow quickly enough out of wherever it lives today or however it's getting collected today, and being exposed and formatted in a way that the AI system, whatever tool that's using, can consume it. So it's a huge problem. And again, this is where integration technology comes into the picture. It's the connective tissue, it's the glue that literally sticks systems together to allow data to flow across system boundaries. And that's absolutely vital. If your AI system needs training data, it needs numbers to crunch. It needs data to break down and slice and dice and interpret and overlay. And if you can't free that data up from wherever it's living right now, then you're going to have a challenge sometimes with AI system adoption, whatever you're trying to do with it. If the data isn't there, it isn't going to work.
The other interesting aspect of this whole problem space is that because AI has so much hype around it, because it has so much potential when done right, it is motivating a lot of people to invest a lot of time, energy, and thought into how to apply it to their business, which may also cause people to be a little bit too hasty to dispose of existing systems simply because it doesn't have that out of the box integration with whatever the LLM provider or AI services that they want to take advantage of. And beyond just saying, okay, well, this system as it exists right now doesn't do exactly what I want to be able to plug nicely into this other system, what are some of the other strategies that teams should be thinking of that allow them to continue operating a system that does provide value for a given use case? Maybe it does it's the workhorse of their business analytics suite, but it doesn't have AI out of the box. But being able to provide some bridges and integration strategies to allow for that system to still be used effectively to power other generative AI systems without necessarily having to completely retire it and build something new in its place.
That can be a challenge because everybody is eager to see what is the latest technological innovation. How can I use this? How can I gain competitive advantage through it? And yes, technology changes rapidly. And being able to be an early adopter and come to grips with that and innovate and see how you can leverage that within your organization to maybe grow revenue, cut costs, whichever way you look at it, increase profitability, increase margin. It's super important. But at the same time, you have to weigh the risks. It's like, what is the risk that this thing that is not proven, it's an idea, it's a hypothesis we have, what is the risk that we go down this path and in doing so we break something that we absolutely need to run today? And so this is where we have to be careful when we think about infrastructure and projects and how do we onboard new technologies into our technology stack. And maybe some of these things need to live in isolation. Maybe you do need to put up a barbed wire fence and have like an interim layer or an interim process. I mean, if you have a system that is the workhorse, that is doing everything you need it to right now, when you look to the future, again, pilots, proof of concept systems in isolation potentially that have maybe a one step removed from your data source, take the data out of that system, dump it somewhere else, or, consolidate it up to the cloud, use any integration technology you like to crack that open and make it accessible without impacting the existing system today. But again, part of this is the need for a migration strategy. It's as you onboard new systems or you think about innovation and adding new systems to the mix of your infrastructure, you have to think about how does this play well with others, or does this play well with others? How do we connect the dots? And if I do seriously need to change something in my existing system so that I have data flowing, is there a way of doing that generically that, again, I don't get locked into this particular one model or one vendor? Because that AI space is changing so rapidly right now. We don't know what the next big thing in that area is going to be. We don't know who's going to come out on top and who's going to fall by the wayside. I mean, I think if you follow the technology press, you'll see that in recent days, weeks, months, there have been layoffs with different industry leaders in different areas related to AI. And some of these giants in technology, you could have bet almost that, yes, they're going to spend a fortune in AI and they're going to come out on top, but they're actually reducing their spend in certain areas. So we're not yet we're seeing some leaders, but we haven't seen anything concrete with regards to who's going to be the main winner in the AI space. There are a lot of different tools for a lot of different jobs. And so revamping a system that works today, or having to rework a system that works today and is a key component of an organization's data infrastructure, and replacing that or changing it and locking yourself into one specific AI path, I would argue that's possibly unwise. I think the thing to think about when you're looking at these new technologies and how do you adopt them, or how do you connect them into your existing infrastructure, is to take a look and see, is there somewhere that I can put it? Is there some way I can connect these systems without being point to point? Is there a way of making this effectively vendor neutral? So for example, if I have a system, can I take the data from there and integrate it with maybe a cloud data warehouse that another system can come and pick it up from? Do I have to take it from my existing system today and push that into a proprietary system to support my innovation project? We have to think about again, composable enterprise, how do I make my system pluggable? That if this AI initiative is not going to work with this particular AI component, can I pull that out and replace it with something else? And the process continues to flow, or the data continues to flow, the process continues to work. So it's a challenge, especially when a lot of people are saying, oh, that project's got AI in the name, we're going to fund that. It's a lot of organizations are throwing spaghetti against a wall right now. We have to be considered. And I say we, because at SnapLogic, we do this too. We have to be considered in how we invest in AI initiatives. What are our acceptance criteria? What are our definitions of success? What does a successful outcome look like? What are we trying to achieve? And, what technology will support that process? It can be challenging trying to think about, okay, well, I'm getting so wrapped up in the cool tech. That's brilliant. It's really exciting. It can do all this crazy stuff. That's great. But what's the benefit? How does that materialize as a win for your organization? And if that win isn't clearly defined, if the definition of success isn't measurable, and I was going to say articulable, which is not a terribly articulable word. But, if you cannot quantify, and if you cannot define what success looks like with an AI project or an innovative project, you have to think about, is that the project that you actually want to pursue? So.
And as you have worked with organizations and teams in the process of either integrating their legacy systems into new deployments or migrating to newer technology systems, what are some of the most interesting or innovative or unexpected ways that you've seen them address the costs and process of managing and retiring those legacy systems?
Well, I don't think we should ever underestimate people's capability for innovation. And when I say that you can design a system to work one way and somebody will come in and take it in a completely unplanned direction, reusing schemas, it's just crazy, really, the number of things people do with technologies that you never actually planned for. And it's because somebody now has access to data that they didn't see previously, and they'll say, oh, well, actually, I can take this data and I can extract it from there and transform it from there and then apply it to a completely different process. It's weird and wonderful the way people work with technology. I'm not sure I have a really, really good example to give you on this one, though, Tobias, I'm afraid. But yeah, it's every time, even as a consultant, every time I went in to talk with a customer, and today when I talk to customers at a sort of from a product management standpoint, it's they're like, oh yeah, and then we just do this with it, and you're like, okay, but that's not what that was designed for, right? Like, yeah, but we just take this and we offload it somewhere else and some other system pops up. I have had customers that I worked with on products say, I love your product, I never have to use it. I thought that was a really interesting message to get back from a customer when we work really hard on the user experience, when we get our designers out and we sort of do blue-green testing, or A/B testing, and we work with them to say, okay, it's really usable, it's stunning, it's beautiful, it's easy to use, you don't really need training on it. You can just work out what you need to do by the interface itself. The experience is really slick. And then to have somebody say, I love your product, I don't ever have to use it. I'm like, okay, appreciate that. After all that time and effort invested, and somebody said, oh yeah, I just turn on the email notifications. I just check my email inbox and I know it's working. So in some ways, it's really great that user has that experience, that they trust the technology so well. They never have to log in because it doesn't need modifying. They literally set it and forget it. But at the same time, obviously, we do like systems. We do like to create systems that are easy to use, technology that is easy to adopt. But saying, we love your tool, we don't use it. I'm like, okay, I'm not sure that's a message any product manager really wants to hear.
And as you have worked in this space and helped teams address these challenges and costs of managing and migrating from legacy systems, what are the most interesting or unexpected or challenging lessons that you've learned personally?
For me, it's sometimes, when we talk to customers, one of the common themes is we have a system. I think we touched on this earlier. Customers, a lot of prospects and a lot of customers say to me, we have a system. We know it's important. We don't necessarily know all that it does. We don't necessarily know why it works this way. We just know, or we inherited it and we know it has this many things. And these ones we just don't want to touch. It's the level of fear and uncertainty around things that are running today in people's environments. And the fear that if I touch this or breathe on it, even if I get within 100 yards of it or even whisper the name of the system, something is going to go sideways, something is going to go wrong. That surprises me. I probably shouldn't, but it does. That these tools that we have built, or that our customers and organizations have built with other vendors, not necessarily with our technology, but these legacy systems that they have in place, that the owners of those systems, they use them on a daily basis. They're not sure what they do, and they are so worried that there is something there that is undocumented, untraceable, that if they do one wrong thing, everything is going to explode. And so there is a real fear of, I'll just put it in a box in a cupboard and I'll forget about it, because I just don't want to unpack that. It's this, these are tools, they have been designed to help. And there is this massive amount of fear about even considering, how do we start approaching this problem? It's this, somebody I was talking to yesterday described the situation they walked into. They were promoted into a role, and the systems they inherited, the words actually used were, it was a bowl of spaghetti. And it was because there were all these different systems all entangled. Nobody really had an understanding of what each one of them did and how they all interacted. And that's our standard of that's our status quo. That's what we're used to right now. And it doesn't have to be that way. And so there is this huge mess, and people are very scared of, what if I pull the wrong thread or touch the wrong thing? Everything's going to come to pieces. And I can't touch anything until I truly understand what all is going on there. So sometimes it's easy just to throw the entire thing out and start over from scratch. But now you've got a sunk cost. So, at SnapLogic, we are working with technology, with tools to try and sort of ease some of that burden. How do we straighten out the mess of, I've got a legacy system, I'm not entirely sure what it does, I'm not entirely sure what systems it connects or what transformations it runs, how it manages my data and how my data gets from A to B. We're working to allow our customers to pull data out of those systems, and then using tools like an AI, like LLMs, to process that data so that you actually have an understanding of where you are right now. Because trying to adopt or trying to innovate in the IT space or build new tools in your IT infrastructure is really challenging if you don't know what your current system does, what it is, how it works. You always need to have an as-is state, and then you always need to think about, where do I want to be? And then you have to map out the route to get there. That's the standard innovation pattern. And so being able to understand, what do I have today, without having to go and quiz 50 people, without having to go through 10 years worth of emails or documentation that was out of date almost the moment the system went live. Being able to pull the data from the existing system, intelligently parse it and understand what the system does today, so that you can then use that to feed into, how do you want to take this forward into the new world, into your new tech stack. And that is one of the challenges that we have on a regular basis, that we work with our professional services teams and our customers to solve. How do we make this easier? It's not easy, but it's easier. And how do we make it quicker and less costly? Because you can achieve anything if you can throw enough bodies at a problem. The challenge is doing that in a timely fashion without slowing down all of your other innovations, all your other projects. So being able to balance those resources and apply technology intelligently to understand what is going on in your existing system, that's a challenge that we're trying to solve right now.
Are there any other aspects of the work that you're doing at SnapLogic, or this overall topic of managing and migrating from legacy systems and challenges of modernizing to take advantage of these newer cloud native and generative AI capabilities in the data space that we didn't discuss yet, that you'd like to cover before we close out the show?
Yeah, I think some of the biggest challenges that organizations have today and will continue to have as we move forward into a more AI-enabled world is really governance. Observability and governance are two key areas that, how do I know what's going on with my system, is always one of the first questions. How is it working? Is it working? How is it working? Are there any things that I need to take a look at, because any leading indicators that are telling me something's going sideways? And also, am I doing things the right way and in compliance with any regulations, whether that's coming from my industry or from a government somewhere? Those are two areas that I think are going to be increasingly challenging as we work with a lot more sort of black box systems. The traceability and the transparency of, where is my data coming from? How is it being manipulated or used by an AI tool or technology? How do I know what's actually being sent to that tool? How is that tool then going to use it? And exactly how broad is that data going to be spread? Is it going to be used to train a model that I now don't have control over? Is it going to be shared, or could this be potentially a data breach? So observability and governance are two areas where I think we need to improve the tooling and should absolutely be considerations for anybody in any IT innovation project, but particularly in the AI space. Understanding who owns that data, where does it go, how is it managed, how is it manipulated, and being able to trace that lineage so that a decision that comes out of an AI empowered tool, you can actually trace it back to what was the source, where's the evidence that you can trace it back to the source data and what decisions were made over time. I think those are two, observability, traceability, and governance are areas that really need to be considered in any IT innovation project, but also getting the tools to work for you. Can you apply AI tooling or modern innovations to help you where they can, but not overrule you where you have to make a human in the loop decision? I mean, we talk about AI taking people's jobs, being able to, I'm just going to put AI on this and it's going to solve all my problems. But it's not everything that comes out of an AI tool is necessarily going to be right. So we need to be able to identify what data is feeding that decision, how it's being used, to know where that decision is coming from, that it's grounded in reality, it's not a hallucination, and that it's trustworthy. This is one of the biggest challenges when we started with IT is like, okay, I found some data from somewhere. How do I know that it's right? How do I know that it's correct? And being able to trace and govern the data as it flows into those tools and as it comes out the other end, that's going to be absolutely key for anybody in the IT space working with any type of innovation.
All right. Well, for anybody who wants to get in touch with you and follow along with the work that you're doing, I'll have you add your preferred contact information to the show notes. And as the final question, I'd like to get your perspective on what you see as being the biggest gap in the tooling or technology that's available for data management today.
So I think really it's this lack of transparency. It's we can ask an LLM, you go to your model of choice and ask it a random question. And if it's about something that see how accurate the answer is. It can be challenging to understand where a response from an AI tool comes from, what is feeding into it, what is influencing it, what aspects of data and where that data is coming from are framing the context for that answer from an AI system. So we have to be very careful that if we are using AI empowered tools, that we are giving it the right data, that it's timely, that it's accurate. I think this goes back to our earlier conversation. How can we trust that the data going in is clean, it's right, it's accurate? And how can we trust that it is then being consumed correctly? And so what is coming out is trustworthy. For me, the biggest gaps we have right now are understanding how the data is being used and being able to govern and make choices about how our data is being used through these third-party vendors. Because again, unless you build the LLM yourself, you are not necessarily going to be owning that technology. So being able to have that level of transparency, ownership, and governance over that data and how it is used, how it's manipulated, and how it's interpreted, I think there is some work to do there. We have storage systems. I think those are going to constantly improve. We have different protocols for sharing data. I think those are going to change and improve. But ultimately, how do we manage, govern, and trace back where these decisions are coming from, whether they're made by a person or whether they're made by technology? That's going to be interesting going forward to see how innovation changes that.
All right. Well, thank you very much for taking the time today to join me and share your thoughts and experiences on these challenges of managing legacy systems, understanding the costs associated with them beyond just the monetary, and some of the strategies for how to be thinking about investing in the eventual drawdown of a technology at the point of implementation, as well as ways of addressing existing systems that need to be retired and how to keep the business moving in spite of that. So I appreciate all of the time and effort that you're putting into helping organizations address those complexities, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, Tobias. It was good to be here.
Thank you for listening, and don't forget to check out our other shows. Podcast.init covers the Python language, its community, and the innovative ways it is being used. And the AI Engineering Podcast is your guide to the fast-moving world of building AI systems. Visit the site to subscribe to the show, sign up for the mailing list, and read the show notes. And if you've learned something or tried out a project from the show, then tell us about it. Email hosts at dataengineeringpodcast.com with your story.
And to help other people find the show, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts and tell your friends and coworkers.